In this video, we will be building out our getTransaction transaction ID endpoint by using our new getTransaction method. So let's do this now. The first thing that we want to do inside of this endpoint is store the transaction ID that is sent in as a request parameter. So we will say const transaction ID equals rec.params.transaction ID. Cool. The next thing that we want to do is we want to use our getTransaction method. So we will say bitcoin.getTransaction, and this method will take in this transaction ID variable. So we'll put that right here. Now, from this getTransaction method, we get returned to us an object that has the transaction we are looking for on it and the block that that transaction is in. So we want to store this data. So inside of our endpoint, we will say const transaction data equals the result of our method. Cool. And finally, we simply just want to send a response back that has this transaction data in it. So we will say res.json, and we will send back an object that has the transaction of transaction data.transaction, and it has the block of transaction data.block. Cool. Easy as that. That's all we need to do to build out our transaction endpoint. Now, to test this endpoint, we can head over to the browser to explore our blockchain. So let's do that now. So in the browser, we will hit localhost 3001/blockchain. Cool. Now let's add some transactions and blocks to this blockchain. So we'll head over to Postman, and we will hit the transaction endpoint, which is right here. The transaction and broadcast endpoints on localhost 3001. And we'll just send a couple of example transactions into here. So let's make one transaction that's worth 100 Bitcoin and send that. And let's make another transaction worth 200 Bitcoin and send that. Next, let's mine a new block so that we can put these transactions into our blockchain. So in the browser, we will hit localhost 3001/mine. Cool. So we just mined a new block, and it has the correct transactions in it. Let's make a couple more transactions. So over in Postman, we'll make a transaction worth 300 Bitcoin and send that. Next, let's mine another block. So we'll refresh our mine endpoint. And that has the correct transactions in it. And let's make two more transactions. We'll make one worth 400 Bitcoin and send that. And we'll make one worth 500 Bitcoin and send that. And let's mine one more block. Cool. It has the correct transactions in it. Now if we refresh our blockchain on our 3001/blockchain endpoint, we can see that we have all of the correct data inside of here. Cool. So now what we want to do is we want to test our transaction ID endpoint. So let's do that now. So we'll head over here, and in a new tab, we will hit localhost 3001/transaction/ and now is when we need to copy a transaction ID. because we are searching by transaction ID. So let's just pick one of these transactions. It doesn't really matter which one. And we'll copy the ID. And we'll paste it as the second parameter over here. Now we should get the correct transaction and the correct block back. Let's see if this works. Cool. So this is our whole response, and it has a transaction on it and a block on it. Awesome. So it looks like we got the correct transaction back. That's good. And we got the correct block back as well. This is the transaction that we are looking for right here. Awesome. Let's do one more example. So this time let's search for this transaction ID, which is the ID of a mining reward. So we'll take this ID and copy it and paste it right here and hit enter. Cool. So it looks like our transaction is correct, and we get the correct block back as well, which is block of index 3, and you can see here that this transaction is in block 3. Awesome. Now if we hit this endpoint with a transaction ID that does not exist, we get null return for the transaction and for the block, which indicates to us that this transaction ID does not exist in our blockchain. Perfect. Cool. So our transaction endpoint and our get transaction method are working just as they should.